Welcome to In Conversation. One of our main goals for In Conversation is to have conversations that help us learn and grow. So today I have Bruce Dixon, who is a world traveler, an innovator, and he's here today to have a conversation about why we should be open to possibilities. We want to talk about opening ourselves to possibilities. So why is it important, or why even talk about opening oneself to possibilities?
Being cheeky, because it's possible. So thank you, Dr. Heter. First and foremost, I wanted to say, really commend you on this show, right?
Thank you
So
very much.
by sort of having a vision for this and sharing these opportunities with the world, I think is amazing. So I wanted to say kudos and congratulations, and thanks for having me here today, right? So
Wonderful.
yeah, so again, this is interesting. I love this subject, right? This whole notion of learning and growing, right? And for me, being open to possibilities is sort of a kind of a main fundamental piece of learning and growing, right? So I think it's critical to talk about because, over time, I think as we age, and in my case, you fall into patterns, right? And we think about growth, but in a certain pattern. So even growth takes this sort of trajectory of a pattern, right?
Exactly.
So our brain is this amazing organ, right? And the brain seeks to keep us safe and to do that in the most efficient way. So therefore the brain seeks patterns, right? So as we do things, you make these neural connections and the brain looks for patterns. Things have happened in this fashion, this way, and this way. It's kind of like getting in a comfort zone, right? Because we know how to do it, the brain knows how to do it, it's really efficient. Right? But I think what happens over time is that there becomes an awareness that we're looking to grow, but we're using the same patterns.
Right.
So therefore, one has to be cognizant or open to the possibility, right, that there are other ways to do it. Right?
And there's other things to do.
And there's other things to do.
Right.
Right? So we can think about growth, I'll use an example, maybe a trite one. So in terms of staying physically fit. So, you learn how to exercise, or you take a course of exercise, and you do this over time. And you may come to a certain level of growth, right? But then you become a pattern, but you keep doing the same thing over and over again, the same time, maybe the same exercise, the same calisthenics, you get to a point of diminishing returns, right? So sometimes you need to break the pattern, right? And then being open to possibilities is critical, because now you start to think or see, like, wow, maybe if I did something a little different here or something a little different there, then I might have avenues to take me to heights or depths that I couldn't in a certain pattern.
Right. So I like what you're saying about that, because what happens even in your life, because you've been doing the same thing, and this is how I do it, this is what I do.
Right.
So now you want to break out of those patterns, but what ends up happening is that you have a point where you get to diminishing returns.
Yes.
You're no longer getting satisfaction out of what you used to do, and so now it becomes a time in your life that you might need to make some changes.
Right.
But what happens for a lot of us, we get stuck in the box.
Yeah.
And then, so tell us about the box that you were stuck in, that you felt and you had to get to a place where you have to break out of this box.
Yeah. But you have to be open to possibilities to even think about breaking out of the box. Right? Because if you're in the box and you don't think there's another way to do it, or there are other possibilities to do it, you won't break out of the box.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So I just find it fascinating, right? And I feel so fortunate to sort of be in a space of time in my life where I'm pushing myself more and more every day. Therefore, it's opening myself to possibilities by doing things, right?
And tell me, so adding to the top of that, you talked about flowing. Because I think you said some very, very significant, important things about letting it flow and letting the universe talk to you and breaking out of your own patterns and your own mindset, so that you let the universe talk to you and help you to flow to the next level. Tell me some more about what you were talking about with that.
Yeah, that's kind of a mouthful of a subject, right? So a number of things. I think at the highest level is, again, awareness, potentially, that there's another way to see it. There's another way to do it, and that past performance or past patterns or the past, the way that I did things in the past, may not necessarily, right, get me to where I want to go, which means I have to break some things. I have to break some patterns. But being open to possibility says this pattern that I followed for so many years, in many cases, may be completely different, right? May be completely different than what's going to require for me to sort of reach this next place or to get out of the box,
Right.
if you would.
Right.
And, you know, I think one of the ways that I've chosen to open myself more and more is a few things, right?
Okay.
For me, the first is a daily practice of meditation.
Okay.
For me, meditation for me has done a number of things, but the primary piece for me is this. It's the quieting of my mind from the perspective of, you know, we have sort of this conscious mind and unconscious mind, right? Based on some research, we believe that most of what we do is based from the unconscious, which could be anywhere from 90% of the things we do on a daily basis is unconscious.
Right.
And maybe, you know, between, 5 and 15% of what we do daily is in a conscious state.
Right.
So meditation for me has helped me to quiet the more conscious mind, right? Because the conscious mind handles short-term memory, right? It's that, what some people call the inner Woody Allen. It's that chatter. Oh no, you can't do this. You're not strong enough to do this. You're right. Why are you doing this? You're crazy. You're gonna die. Right. So quieting this sort of inner Woody Allen for me is what happens with meditation. It's not that my thoughts stop, but you sort of move past this sort of Woody Allen conscious mind to allow sort of that subconscious mind where all the matter is to sort of surface, and you to be able to for me to be able to listen and to hear the more significant, things that have connected in an unconscious way. Right. So I think for me, the first was just sort of that practice every day of just quieting and allowing sort of this to sort of flow, and then things surface. Right. And as they surface, for me, being more open to and willing to accept, the possibility that this may not be in the typical pattern that I followed, but it doesn't mean I shouldn't sort of move in that direction.
Right. And now, we talk about the mind stuff, so to speak. It's not necessarily, it's patterns, but it's also what you are doing, like what you're involved in. So, for example, if you had a particular, most of us are socialized to, these are things we do. Go to school, get a career.
Conditions, right?
Right. So you're conditioned to this world. Correct. Right. And so how to survive and to be in the world. Correct. But then it becomes to a point where you realize that this world there's more to it than just this. Right. Right. And so now you might even begin to shift what it is you even think you want to do. Even not even patterns in terms of how you do it, but what it is you're going to do. Or what
no doubt about it.
Do.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Right. And so for some of us, that's what happens to some people once they get to a certain place in their life and they're like, what am I going to do next? Right. Because they were so used to doing things a certain way, but then it's hard to break our minds from the way we used to do things or what we used to do to now to begin to explore other possibilities. So tell us a little bit about the, most people would feel absolutely fearful of just leaving a career behind, leaving a life behind and going on, starting anew and going on traveling the world and going out there pretty much on faith. Yeah. Or, letting the universe speak to you as you flow and you begin that journey. Yeah. So how does someone even begin that process of, letting go of all the old stuff and letting stuff? I think we talked about yesterday, you saying most of us operate out of fear, ego, obligation. Yeah. And so what is that other aspect of ourselves that we could operate out of? Yeah. Where we could, expand our world and our horizons and all those things.
Personally, for me, your reference is, you're running a company successfully, things are going really well, and I decided to leave that company and to leave the country and start to travel. Again, I think it goes back to a lot of the things we talked about. One, a practice, right? So there's a practice of prayer and meditation, right? Which I think starts to allow that real inner voice to start to speak. Right. right? And in my case, that inner voice, right, started to speak really loudly.
Okay.
That the work that I had done was finished, right? You came there, you accomplished the task that was necessary for you to accomplish at that time. And now it's sort of on to the next thing. So for me, it was that, really allowing that, and through a number of ways. Some people meditate, some people pray, some people have traumatic events in their lives that sort of cause them to listen, right, a little more. In my case, it was the practice, right? And also it was sort of this recognition that I had achieved a lot of the things that I wanted to achieve.
Right.
And that voice had become really, 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 really loud, right? So some people say the voice sometimes speaks in a still small voice, right? But this wasn't still or small at all. This was started to scream.
Yeah.
Kind of like this is an opportunity. And I think we have, the ability to choose whether we're going to pursue those things or not.
Right.
So that was kind of what sort of led me to really start to think about leaving and pursuing other things. I think another side to it is, it's kind of like the things I had done in the past, right? So, if I look at my life from the time, I was born that I'm conscious about, and even the stories that I was told before I was even conscious about those, it's been a series of doing things that seemed like they were impossible.
Right.
Right? So growing up as I did, I remember being really thin and kind of had a heart murmur. And I remember a doctor saying at one point, it would not be possible for you to even run and do other things, like run with the normal kids because you're going to have heart problems, things along those lines. Well, I went on to not only, run around with the neighbors, but I went on to play football in college and play professionally in Europe. So that sort of starts, right, with this notion that things that seem impossible. Were possible. So you start to lean into those a little more. And it seems like, okay, didn't know when I was that age that I'd be the CEO of a successful company. But you start to push up against some of these things, and over time you start to build this sort of faith that things are possible, if you would. So I think that's a big part of it as well, this kind of appreciation for the fact that I've done things in the past that seemed impossible, that leads me to the next thing. And in my case, this was like a significant sort of belief in the possible, and then pursuing it is another thing.
Yeah, I think you had given a scripture. Did you say that in the scripture about the possibility that Jesus said?
Yeah, Jesus said to his disciples, with God all things shall be possible.
That's right.
If you would, right? It's it's one of those interesting scriptures that I've shared with friends and we've talked about, and it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's easy to say, right? But pursuing that, in our daily lives is another matter. Right? It's a completely different matter. So it's like, in some sense, we say that, all things are possible, and we are sort of presented with an opportunity or a challenge, and we sort of rise to that challenge. And then the next one comes along, and for whatever reason, it's like we have selective amnesia, and it's almost like, well, that was big. So this one, I see it's possible. But I think another side to it is the fact that it's like, sometimes those things that we sort of aspire to that seem impossible, we get sort of tangled, or I got sort of tangled up in how. Right, because I knew how this happened. I can't see how that would happen, and sort of the how, in many ways, in my case, would trip you up. Right. So. Yeah.
So I think it's interesting you say that, because when you went back to your childhood and things like that. And I think being a child of the civil rights movement is kind of seeing, and then after that, all the doors that's kind of opened up, so to speak, and so I always thought that things were possible. Like whatever I wanted to do was possible. Right. And but I always felt like you had to have a plan. Right. But what's beginning to happen for me now is that was early in my life, and I did plan, and you put some things in place, and they worked out pretty well. Right. But then you realize your planning blocked you even in a box, because it's good to plan. But now you realize that there are possibilities, but the possibilities are still within that box that I had set for myself.
Correct.
So now you have to say, I have to even break out of what even the possibilities were only those possibilities.
Correct.
That I thought were possible.
Yes, exactly.
But what about things that you don't think, like one of the things that you talk about, one of the reasons why it's important to meditate is because when you you're thinking about 1 or 2, 3 or 4, however many things you're thinking about.
Yeah.
There's a million other things that you're not thinking about.
Right.
Right. There's a million other things that's possible.
Right.
Right. The same thing that when you think that you have a pattern, or you set put a box around yourself, this is what I'm going to do,
Yeah.
and you do all that, and then, but you might be locking yourself from all the other possibilities
Yes.
outside of the box that you've set for yourself.
Yes. Right.
Right, so-
Yeah. Well, a quote that comes to mind, I think it was Wayne Dyer who said, that we should, aspire to be open to all things, but attached to none.
Right.
Right. So you're right. The second you put a stake in the ground and say that's what I'm doing,
Right.
myopically focus. And I think as you move along, at some point you have to focus. Right. At some point you need to sort of channel your energy to sort of start moving in a direction.
Right.
But even within that
Right.
is the appreciation
Right.
for, like, it's all possible.
Right.
And
But see, it's interesting because like we just said that the statement that comes from the ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
About being open to all the possibilities, because it's just very, very interesting how then you come to a place in your life,
Yeah.
and then you're like, this was the first time in my life, like, I don't have a plan.
Right. And then
Like, then it's like,
right.
oh my God, what am I going
What
to do?
am I
I don't have
gonna
a plan.
do?
Then the fear, the anxiousness, and all that comes into being. Comes into manifestation. And then you realize, once you start doing the meditation, you start understanding there's aspects of ourselves, but there's an eternal aspect of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And that's what meditation does, is it helps connect you to the eternal.
Right.
And so when you do that, and you let that voice begin to speak to you, you're like, I don't have a plan, but you do have a plan.
Correct.
The plan is to let the voice speak to you, to let the eternal speak to your eternal, and let that lead and guide you.
Yeah, it's interesting, like you said, having a plan. So
Right.
going to business school, getting an MBA, right? Getting honorary doctorates. It's at some point you start to believe the way.
Right.
Right, and that it's an interesting thing I try to keep myself from is saying I'm an expert.
Right.
Right, because an expert kind of says I have my hands around all of it already and I've got a lock on it, which
Right.
kind of puts a barrier around the possible, if
Right.
you would, right? So yeah, it just becomes really interesting as you have all of these things in your toolkit and you come
Right.
to a place where maybe those tools don't
Don't
serve you anymore.
Right. Exactly.
And now you got
Now it's like, oh my God, what am I gonna
now
do?
what are you going to do,
Right.
right? What am I going to do? Particularly if you start to feel a call
Right.
to do something
Uh,
that isn't
Okay.
linear. It's not
That's
a
right.
linear progression of, okay, I have this opportunity. This opportunity leads to this. I kind of know this plan. It makes
Right.
sense on this ladder or this trajectory that I've created.
Right.
But then you get to a point where maybe the ask
Mm-hmm.
isn't on the ladder,
Right.
or the ask doesn't. The ask, right, or the call doesn't necessarily lead you to the same economics or the
Right.
same desires. So
Right.
now it's kind of like, how do I get to this point? Like, I can't use those same tools. They don't
Right.
serve
Need
me.
anymore. Right.
They're not serving me to the same way. I still have them,
Right.
but I need new tools.
Not only do you need
Right.
new tools, but you also, because now if you make that shift, right?
Yeah.
You said you need new tools, but you also need to be open
Yes.
so that might not be the same.
Yes.
Because people who are planners, which I am,
yeah, sure.
I'm very, very specific about, and you recognize that you can plan and anything can go any kind of way,
Correct.
but you still have to have a foundation or a plan.
Sure. Right.
And I also want to say that we're not saying not to do that,
No, of
because
course not.
everything that we did in our lives thus
Huge
far
plans. Right.
help prepare us for those stages in our lives.
Absolutely.
Right, and so you have to have a plan to be able to set a foundation for yourself, to take care of your children.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Prepare for your future. And
No
things.
doubt about
Nobody's
it.
not saying throw the plan away.
Oh, of course not.
But what we're saying is that just be open.
But be open
Yeah.
to how your plan can be implemented.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Not, like in my case, you run a business, right? You have a strategic plan, you have an operating plan, you start the year. It's a guide.
Right.
But you realize there are things that are going to happen throughout the year you can't anticipate. So you have to have this dexterity or flexibility
Exactly.
to be able to move forward.
Right.
If you have you have a rigid plan and you're moving down a path and you're not, producing the sales quantity or volume that you need, you
Right.
can keep going down saying that's what we planned, or you can flex and see that it may come in
Right.
another way.
Right.
But for me, it's become so important for me to appreciate that I'm looking at it in one way. Is there another way?
Right.
is there another possibility, right? Is there another sphere? Is there another realm? Is there another, potential that I don't know? And
Right.
and if you keep pushing yourself to that,
Right.
to say, yes, I could do that, right? And then it's kind of, is this inspired action or is it not? So
Right.
for me, this idea of staying open, it's not necessarily like you jettison all your plans or you don't have an intention and a focus to move forward. I think what I've softened on and what's really come to me is the how it's going to happen,
Okay.
right? So for example, I want to travel around the world, right? That was an intention of mine, so I can learn and grow and to do those things that I think I'm called to do to prepare me for the work that I know that I'm called to do. My first thought is, well, I'm going to have to either take another job in a way that I know because of the skill set that I have.
Right.
I know this domain, so I want to take the job. I'm going to have to take a job in this way. Well, I leave the company and I start to think about traveling around the world. Then you start to uncover things that you never imagined. Like, you can house sit. You can go to a country and somebody will let you stay at their house for 6 months just to watch their house, and they may have a pet. Well, you're not spending any money.
Right.
For accommodation.
Right.
Right. So that's another way. There are tons of organizations that work-away kinds of organizations where you can go to and volunteer for 2 or 3 hours a day, and you get free room and board.
Right.
So I said all that to say, wow, that's a possibility I had never thought.
Right.
But if I didn't take the step to say I'm going to just start moving in that direction, maybe these things wouldn't become open to me as a thought. See them. I'm sort of crafting a book with someone, and one of the chapters in the book is kind of titled "The Old Hell No Syndrome." Well, you going to do that? Oh, hell no. Right. So it's kind of like, yeah, in some cases you get that, but in some cases you just shut down every possibility.
Right.
For you to have something happen without asking the next question.
Right.
And just like that faith and appreciation for it, like, well, what happens if I just take that next step out and see what happens and what might open up? And be open to how it happens.
Right.
Not like it's gotta happen in this lockstep way.
Right.
So in my case, again, wanting to travel around the world, you start to see all of these opportunities.
Right.
And one of the things that happened while I was traveling that not in a billion years what I've thought as a possibility, but being open to it, is if you meet someone while traveling, they say, hey, there's a travel company. They have new tours that they need to promote. They need somebody to go on the tours for them to take pictures and video of the tour with people on the tour so they can market that. So literally, someone pays me and has paid me to go on tours. They paid me to go on vacation.
Right.
Now,
So most of us would never thought that was a possibility.
Right. But when you're open to how it's like I know what I want. I set my intention.
Right.
I set my intention. I make my overture to the universe, source, God. Right. And then I get in trouble when I try to decide how. But here's a big seminal piece for me. Right. Was a big seminal piece for me. Think about anything that we do. Right? I want to travel around the world, right, and do whatever. Well, it's not going to ever be me just traveling all around the world. Meaning, I'm not just going to be able to jump on my own airplane and fly my own plane, put my own gas in the plane, rent my own hotel, cook my own food, right? We're interconnected.
Right.
So my intention is sort of commingled with everyone else's intentions, and they sort of intersect so that there's sort of mutual sort of benefit.
Right.
So it's not possible for me to really understand how all of the pieces will ever fit anyway.
Okay.
You see what I mean? So I want to travel around, I want to do all these other things. Even if I decided I'm going to work and do something in the domain that I was in, it's still going to require people. And it's still going to require sort of interconnectedness that you can't anticipate, if you would. So again, being open to these possibilities have opened up a world to me in a way that, oh my gosh, I never thought people would pay me to travel around on vacation. They're going to pay you and pay for your trip to go on vacation.
Right.
For 10 days.
Right.
So again, that's another possibility which leads you to the next step of, well, if that's possible, what else what other box do I have around my own views of what's possible?
Gotcha.
Right? I want to create wealth, or I want better health, or I want better this, or I want to go to school. And the first thing I've done in the past is say, oh, I can't.
I can't
do it. Or
right.
I can't see it.
I don't see it. Right.
And that I don't see it
Right.
can be that thing that stops us from taking the next step versus saying, oh,
Okay,
wait a minute.
I don't see it.
We don't see most things, right?
Right.
We're not going to see, we don't see tomorrow either.
Right.
But the fact that we can take the step and be open to how it flows to us, that for me has been so important. Okay. So I still plan, I still have my intentions, right? I visualize what I want, but I'm more open today to how it comes.
Look at you. Yeah.
Because even wealth isn't only cash. It's not only financial. Right? And
it's influence, it's friends, it's connections.
It's smiles, it's love, it's being in joyful situations, it's seeing beauty every day. But if you go out and say, I'm looking for wealth, and it's only going to come through this means, I've shut down every possibility of receiving what's already sort of knocking on our door
all the time,
right? And not allowing it in,
right?
If you would. So more and more just pushing out and saying, okay, here's my intention. And knowing, in Christianity, it's common that scripture that says, ask and you shall be given.
Right.
Well, if that's true, then you've asked and you're given. But I think the challenge is, are we willing to accept and allow it?
Right. And that's what I mean about allowing and the things to flow. Right,
because it's not necessarily going to flow in a linear a binary way exactly all the time, because there's so many others that would have to be involved, and the expanded view of sort of what we're after anyway.
Right, exactly. Because I think a lot of people do feel stuck. They feel, I'm stuck in this job, I'm stuck in this situation, and even a relationship that's not good. And so it's really how, I'm thinking you're giving us some answers in terms of how to begin to get out of this feeling stuck.
One of the things I would offer, one of the things I've done is I've pushed myself to do things that I thought were hard or impossible, just to try.
Right.
Just to try, and I'll just share a quick story. I was in Mexico recently at a workshop, and one of the excursions at the workshop was to go to a beach, and they were doing some rock stacking and rock balancing, and for me, it was kind of like, I really didn't get the point. They get there and I stacked a few rocks and was kind of not really that inspired by being there. And then at one point I saw someone had balanced a rock that had a really, kind of sharp edge and point to it. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. Then I saw a rock that had a really sharp edge, pointy edge, and then a really smooth curved surface in front of me. And I just thought, well, I'm here. Why not give it a try?
Right.
Walking over to it, every cell in my body and fiber of my being said that's impossible. But I was like, well, I'm just going to sit down and do it. No harm to sit down and do it. So I'm kind of at it, and I'm holding this rock, and then like an hour and 20 minutes into it, right? I'm starting to appreciate, like, wait a minute, I can actually feel this thing balancing.
Wow.
Right? And then at one point I'm balancing, then all of a sudden my hand just came off. And it was balanced. And that for me was a tectonic shift again in terms of what's possible. But more importantly for me, it's this idea of, what am I keeping myself from?
Right.
Because I think it's not possible. And I'm not even pushing myself to do that. When I started 3 years ago, when I left my company, and with this idea that I was going to start traveling, I didn't necessarily think that it would be possible to travel the way that I'd done for 3 years.
Right.
But it's 3 years.
Right.
So, again, I think one of the things that I've done, and I would encourage others to even consider, is trying something that you thought you couldn't do. Right?
That's a way to begin to break.
Just try it.
Yeah.
Just try. Like, I never thought I could be a salsa dancer.
Right.
Well, I'm going to give it a try. Right. And then it sort of starts to build upon itself. Right. Oh, I didn't think I could do that, and I tried it.
I want you to tell me the example you gave me about, because people, it speaks to two things. One of them talks about the circle of life, the wheel of life, but how we think this is where we are, this is where it is. Right, and don't, because being where we are in life now, we saw things that we didn't know could happen. So you get to a place where you see how things, the outcome of things, and how things are manifested.
Sure.
That I didn't know it was going to look like. The 20 years ago, I had no idea we were going to have internet.
Correct.
I mean, 20 years ago, I had no idea we were going to have social media.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I had no idea we were going to be able to even do marketing through social media.
Sure.
So I'm saying we don't even know how things are going to look now in the future.
Sure.
So you gave me the example of the a young man who somebody gave him a car. Yeah. Right. And so I want you to tell me a little bit about that. Tell me that story really fast. But before I go to that, I wanted to kind of say from this how we just don't know. Things can. You don't think you might be in a situation where you don't even think you have a car, but you don't even think it's possible somebody can give you a car. Right. You see what I'm saying? So
right. Because the pattern means I've got to go to a car dealership and save enough money or have to buy a car. So two things. So the example you're asking about is a friend of mine. I went to visit, and he and I were going to go to dinner, and he drives up in this wonderfully amazing black car. And I was just like, wow, that's really a nice car. And he just walked in with this really smug look on his face, and he sits down. And I was like, so when'd you get this car? What's the deal? And so where'd you get, when'd you get it? Where'd you get it? Like, it's a big luxury car, right? Where'd you get this car, right? And he just gave me a look, and he puts the keys on the table. He said, oh, somebody gave it to me. And I was like, okay. You want to elaborate a little bit like somebody gave it to him? He told about 20 years ago, there was a pastor, a friend of his, who had just started a church, and he wanted to go on a mission, and he had very little money. And so my friend decided to support his effort to move forward 20 years ago, just because he was a friend and he had the opportunity to do that, and he did that. 20 years later, my buddy, his car had just broken down, and he was in need of another car. And he was talking to the same guy and just kind of chatting what was going on. I was like, oh, I'm having trouble with this. I got to go take care of these things today. And 2 weeks later, he gets a call from his wife and on his cell phone and says, there's a flatbed truck here with a car they say is yours. Did you buy a car? Do you know anything about this? And he said, of course not. And he goes home, and then obviously with a little investigation, he finds that person gave him the car. Just gave him the car, right? So that was a possibility he didn't think. I think another point to this is, the future, I used to think of the future as sort of being fixed. I thought the future was sort of like, oh, it's out there. Right. And I'm doing what I can to meet it. Right. What I've come to believe is that we're creating it. Exactly. Right? So it's not like the future's it's set today and just waiting for us to get there, and we're trying to scramble and do everything we can to keep up. My belief and my practice is one of, no, we're creating it. Right. So the things we're doing every day, more from an internal practice, are our beliefs, our intentions, our goals, our aspirations, and clearly our behaviors and actions, which are driven by our beliefs. Right. Right. Those are the things that are creating the future. Right. If you would, which kind of takes this whole conversation, right, kind of full circle, right, for me at least, because I think sometimes when we think about is something possible or not, it's as if it already exists and I'm trying to get there. Okay. But in this calculus that we're talking about, it's not a matter of does it exist already and how can I get there? It's a matter of can I create it? Right, exactly. And we are. And how do we create it? And we create it in large part, the bigger part of it, but our thoughts and our intentions. Right. Those are the drivers of our behaviors and our actions. So what we believe, what our intentions are, drive our behaviors. Right. Our behaviors and actions create the future. It doesn't shape it. Right. It creates it. So this whole notion of are things possible or not, in large part, is a byproduct of an appreciation, or we're actually creating it. Right. Right. So the believing that things are possible is critical because you have a vision for where you really want to go. Right. But then the appreciation for the things that I'm doing every single day will determine whether that reality that comes to fruition. If you would. So even for me, this has been sort of an interesting circular conversation because I think when initially started to talk about possibilities, it was really one more of, I'm there, it's there, I'm trying to get to it,
Right.
versus now it's really a matter of, I have the aspiration and the view for it, and the things that I'm doing every day are going to be the things that are
Right.
going to get me there.
And one of the most significant things is your thoughts about it, because you're creating through your thoughts.
We
And you're creating your whole reality through your thoughts.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a big one, right?
That's huge. So.
Right. We're just planting. We're planting these seeds for the future,
Exactly.
right? That will blossom and bloom to create the realities that we live in.
Exactly. Alrighty. So I think that anything else you'd like to share, or I think that's.
No, I'd just like to say again, thanks for an opportunity to share conversations, and my intention always is to do everything through a filter of unconditional love and joy and compassion.
And so thank you, Bruce, for being here today and talking to us and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your experiences. And so until our next conversation, continue to grow into love, light, and consciousness.